cancer that's metastasized to bone. But my field of expertise in that area was not in chemotherapy, although someone did ask me a question on a podcast once about that.
Okay, well, I'm glad you cleared that up. I got to ask you before we get into the UFO talk. I heard that Russia has allegedly found a cure to cancer. Is there any truth to this?
I haven't heard anything about that. It's not,
Okay.
we hear all kinds of conspiracies that the American government, the Russian government, even the Chinese government are concealing cures for cancer, whether it's methylene blue or some, immunotherapy. But again, those are just conspiracy theories, excuse me. And I haven't seen any scientific papers that would, provide any evidence that's true.
Yeah, I would have seen this just before Christmas. It
Are you
was a
there?
pretty.
I think I
Yeah.
lost you.
Oh, can you see me now? What about now? Oh, I think he may have froze, but he'll be back. We'll put him in and out. He may have just temporarily froze. He is in the New York area where we'll get into the drone stuff. I don't know if he can hear me or not. If you can hear me, log in and log out. That'll sometimes reset it. But we're gonna this is a very credible person that's gonna talk about his abduction experience. Um, yeah, if you could log in and log out, it'll probably come back if you can't hear me now. Hopefully he'll get that at some point because I can see that he's frozen, but we're gonna get him. Um, he is here. He's just frozen right now, and I don't know if he can hear me. Just tell him to log in and log out. But there's it looks like there's more news as we're waiting for the doctor to come back on about the drones. I mean, Nancy Mace from Congress, South Carolina rep, just came out in a recent. There he goes. He's going to come back in and out. She just gave an update on two different types of mystery objects in the sky that the government doesn't know about. There he is. If that happens again, just log yourself in and out.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
That's what I tried to do. Sorry about that.
It's okay. So let's get into this. Can you tell us a little bit about your background pre alien abduction?
Okay, so I had majored in neurobiology at the University of Pennsylvania, got a bachelor's degree, and then I became so fascinated uh, with the area of neuroscience that I then went on to get a PhD at the University of Connecticut in neuropharmacology, and that's the study of the effects of drugs on the brain. And as I told you a few minutes ago, I then did after my PhD, did a postdoctoral fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Um, and I mentioned studying the effects of cancer in the bone. And then after that, worked as a cell biologist in the area of metabolic bone diseases, such as osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. Along with that, got into an area where I was attempting to help develop the next generation of orthopedic implants, artificial knees, artificial hips, as well as dental implants, with the idea of trying to improve their longevity in the body. I, Devin, I don't see you anymore. Are you there?
Oh, I just took myself out
Okay,
while you're doing
good.
it. Nobody wants to
All right.
see my face when you're talking.
Okay, so at least I didn't lose you again.
Yeah.
So I've worked for the bulk of my career in the area of bone research as a cell biologist. Also, in my spare time, I went on to get a law degree at night from New York Law School here in New York City, where I live and work. And so, that's my background. I have a pretty strong background in neuroscience, but I worked in a lot of different areas in medical research science. including material science, because as I said, we were trying to develop, new types of orthopedic and dental implants, and that gives me especially with my background in pharmacology, gives me a pretty broad background in the medical sciences that, as it turned out, helped prepare me to for my latest career as a ufologist who's studying his own UFO alien abduction, UFO close encounter and alien abduction experiences.
When you say that you study drugs' effect on the brain, is that pharmaceutical drugs or also street drugs?
Oh well, I mean we I don't think we've had any laboratories looking at the effects of synthetic drugs, but we're looking at a lot of different very interesting projects looking at the effects of opiates on the brain and how to develop um, analogs of heroin that were, or in morphine that have the same pharmacological potency, but without the tolerance and dependence that causes withdrawal and causes addiction, doing things like that.
Very interesting. So I'll let you tell the story because I haven't read the book yet or listened to it. It is available on audio, and I'll just put the graphic up here. Let's get into the actual alien abduction experience. And did you believe in this stuff before any of this happened?
I had all these experiences my entire life. I didn't know what to make of them. So that's a good question that you bring up. It, I didn't really make the connection between what had happened to me and the possible phenomenon of UFOs, aliens being here on Earth and abducting human beings until I started reading these great um, uh, alien abduction books by pioneers such as Bud Hopkins, Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist, David Jacobs, and then Whitley Strieber also published his first book, Communion, in the 80s. And I was just astonished, absolutely. It was mind boggling to read in the abduction literature accounts of hundreds and even thousands of people that so closely mirrored my own experiences. I had seen the same beings that they had seen. I'd been in the same type of environment on board what I thought was what I know now was on board a UFO, but I thought it was some type of strange hospital where I saw alien beings that were no more than 3.5 to 4 feet tall. But I before I had read these books in the 80s, I really hadn't been able to integrate these experiences into my life and make some sense of them. But the parallels were so striking, so close to what people had been, the abductees and contactees had been reporting in the literature, that I had to come to the conclusion that not only was the phenomenon of alien abduction in America completely real, but that I was a part of it, that I was in fact one of the abductees, and that's when I could no longer, you know, um, explain away my experiences as being due to anything other than that in terms of interacting with I knew it had nothing to do with interactions with the government or had come out of the realm of my imagination, that it was real and it involved some type of contact that I had with non-human intelligent beings.
So, what year would this have started, and how old would you have been? And what do you recall from your first experience, what you thought it was? If, as you're
Hmm.
saying, you didn't know what it was until later when these books on the subject came out. And of course, there's no internet in existence um, pre like 1990s, anyways.
Well, the first remarkable experience happened 2 or 3 months before the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. You must be familiar with that case, Devin.
Yeah, I am very
Everybody
familiar
is.
with that. Yeah,
Everybody
that's
is.
one of the
So
most famous, along with Travis Walton's.
that was September of 1961. Now, in the summer before that, and is when I can recall my first encounter at the age of 6 years old, which is just amazingly the age when most abductees report their first experience, their first abduction experience. And I was lying in bed, and I was kind of nodding off to sleep. It was around dusk time, and something attracted my attention. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a glint of light. It was a reflection of some flying object. It must have had a highly polished surface because it was reflecting the waning sunlight you know, quite noticeably. And I saw the strangest looking airplane through my bedroom window that was flying just over the rooftops of the apartment buildings in our neighborhood, maybe 5 or 6 blocks away. And I was fascinated. I wanted to look at this object for as long as I could, but surprisingly did something very strange, very uncharacteristic for me who was a very curious child at that age. I, instead of looking at it, turned my head away from it as if under command and put my head down on the pillow, instantly fell asleep. And when I woke up, I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I'm not lying on my bed. I'm at a kind of a cold, hard surface. I recognize it as some type of an examination table in what I think is some form of hospital. I remember distinctly that the table being way too long and too wide to accommodate the body of a 6-year-old child. It was a very large table for my size, and didn't know where I was, but I was. Um, my attention was attracted by some commotion, maybe 20 feet or so from the foot of the table I was lying on, and I slowly sat up into a complete sitting position, and I was amazed by what I saw. There were literally dozens of small, 3.5 to 4 foot tall beings that were no taller than I was at the age of 6, with disproportionately large, hairless heads. Half of them were working from left to right, half of them were working in the other direction, and I I thought they were doctors of some type, but the strangest looking doctors I had ever seen. But but for some reason, I gathered the impression that I was in some form of clinical environment, there for some type of examination, or you know, and feared that maybe I was going to have some type of procedure beyond a simple examination. And I think I'll stop there in case you have any questions at this point, or we can move on.
Yes. Was there any type of communication?
What happened next is going to illustrate the type of communication I had.
Oh,
I'm staring at these beings. I don't know who they are. I think they're doctors of some type, but some very small doctors. And the thought occurred to me. I don't know why, because I guess they all look so uniformly similar. They look like clones, same height, same features, same weight. I wondered, are there only boys there? Are there boys and girls, in the group? And it's almost as if some intelligence was eavesdropping on my internal dialogue and answered the question for me. I didn't hear a voice, but I was made to understand, yes, in fact. Now, how could I know that unless there was some external communication made that would let me know that, yes, in fact, both sexes, as we understand them, as human beings understood them at that time, were represented in that group of alien beings. And that's the only communication I can recall at that time. Other than me trying to communicate with the beings, at that point I pointed at them and I said, "Hey, you're not my doctors." To the effect, "Why did you bring me here? My parents didn't bring me here. I was not told I was going to see a doctor or doctors at this time. Well, why am I here?" I was kind of indignant. And again, I think I'll stop at this point. Okay, Devin, I lost your audio. I don't know if you could hear me, but I going to send a direct message to you. I think I'm just going to log on again, as you advised me to.
There we go. It should be back
Okay,
now.
I can hear you now.
Yeah. So what I was asking you was as far as the color of the beings and their clothes, what did it look like?
They looked like they had tight fitting um, bodysuits, all the same, looked exactly the same, uh, but all had a white color that was reflecting light. I don't know what the source of the light was, but I know it was a brightly lit, like a hallway type area that was outside the room I was in. The room I was in was separated from that hallway where these I believe the impression I got that these brightly lit white colored beings were walking by some type of entrance that looked like a probably the size of a maybe a double garage door in a house. Um, but I couldn't see whether the door had receded up into the, the top of the entrance or one of the sides. But it was an open garage door type doorway separating me from again the area where the aliens were. Um, and again, but they're all the same color, basically white in color.
And as far as the examination, I guess you're going to get into that as what they actually examined on you.
Well, the problem was at that time, you know, I was a little too assertive, and by pointing at the beings and asking, you know, point blank, what in effect, why did you bring me here? I called attention to myself, and immediately I couldn't see any being in my room. I can only see the beings outside in the hallway, but I felt as if something from a being that was standing behind me or to right or left that I couldn't see. It felt as if I had a hand on my chest. Actually, it felt as large or larger than my chest and abdomen combined, gently but slowly pushing me back on the table. So that, and then for some reason, I didn't really resist that. I completely went along with that until I was in a reclining position again. And then after that, immediately was somehow rendered unconscious. So I really don't know what was done to me medically, experimentally, uh, during that particular abduction episode.
Was that the end of it? You just go unconscious and then you wake up
Yes,
the next morning and
exactly. I wake up. It's the next morning. You know, when I fallen asleep and woke up in this strange environment, it was probably 7:30 p.m. The night before, and I wake up and it's the next morning. And I remember the whole episode, but I don't know what happened after I felt the pressure in my chest, laid down and fell asleep. I can't recall anything that happened after that. And I do want to point out before I forget, Devin, everything reported in my book has been recalled consciously. I've never had any regressive hypnosis sessions to recover any buried memories I have regarding these experiences.
is that because you don't believe in it? Because I'll be honest, I had a past life regression
Hmm.
hypnosis thing and I wasn't sure I fully bought it or not.
That's not the reason. I think I've read so many accounts by abduction investigators that are very methodical in their techniques, very methodical in making sure not to lead the witness in you know in a direction that will elicit some type of false testimony. But with me, by the time I made the connection between what had happened to me and this phenomenon of alien abduction back in the 80s, it was the popular culture was so full of this, of the iconic images, regarding this subject. in the movies, on television, and so many books have been written that showed images, and what the aliens look like and the types of experience that the abductees all had. That I really felt that if I had gone under some type of hypnotic regression, I wouldn't be able to distinguish between what really had happened to me and what I was, you know, um, apparently trying to recall through hypnosis during the session, and what I had read, what I had thought about, what was coming out of my imagination or memory from, what I had learned from what was in the popular culture. So I was very skeptical that I would get any benefit at this point, um, through from regressive hypnosis and trying to retrieve any more of my memories of these experiences.
So were you afraid at all the first time? And were you concerned that this might happen again, or were you just young? I know it's hard to remember being 6 years old. Were you just like, okay, that was weird. I'm just going to go on with my life until the next time happened?
It's so strange because I was, as I say, a very curious child. It's almost as if I was maybe even telepathically convinced or persuaded, or subject to some type of propaganda to make me think that what had happened to me was actually kind of normal. Because prior to the experience I just described to you of, being on the table, uh, that was in the summer. The winter before and the winter afterward, I had had very painful, very very uncomfortable ear infections, and the way I integrated that particular experience into my life as a child at that time is I had convinced myself, or maybe I was told this, that I had had a procedure to treat my ear infections. Because, in fact, the winter after the experience, I did have a recurrence of the infections, but they were not anywhere near as severe as in the previous winter. So I thought, okay, maybe this was, I can't explain why I didn't talk to my parents about it. I just don't have an answer about that. But it was almost as if somebody had said, "This everything's okay. This was supposed to happen. It's fine. This was done for your benefit." That's what I was made to understand, and that's why at that point in my life, I never questioned it. It's only till maybe I didn't start questioning it until maybe 20 years later.
So how many times did it happen to you altogether? And is it still happening?
Several times, it mostly in my early childhood, early teen years. Um, and then, there were other instances where I would, wake up, um, with strange physical symptoms, blood on my pillow, and I didn't know, you know, I hadn't had a cold or an infection of any kind. And since that was such a common physical symptom of alien abduction, these unexplained nosebleeds, I think I had some experiences in my early adulthood, maybe I won't say middle age, but I don't really recall much about those later experiences. It was mainly in my childhood and early teenage years.
So how many years later was the second abduction experience that you could recall?
Oh, 4 years. And again, the my conclusion that I was abducted is based on some type on an inferential analysis. I don't remember the abduction, but I had at the age of 10 an unbelievable close encounter experience. It was again the summertime. I can remember the exact date, June 19, 1965. We're playing a game of kickball in the summer. Um, Shortly before dusk, I was the first in the group of 8 children, all around, 10, 11 years of age, to see this fantastically brilliant light out of the corner of my eye. But I couldn't get a good view of it because it was obstructed by a large, very large oak tree in the center of our front lawn. So, not really saying anything to anyone in the group, I immediately started walking toward the front door of our house where I could get an unobstructed view of the object. And it was fantastic. I describe it as having the configuration of the biblical Star of Bethlehem. So it looked like a star, not a point source of light, like from a planet or star from a great distance. This was literally 2.5 to 3 times the size of the full moon. I could barely look at it. It was so brilliant. But to get to your question, I followed it until it disappeared over the horizon, because when I first saw it, it was motionless, wasn't making any sound. Um, so we watched it for maybe 30 to 60 seconds, at which point, as if by a flip of a switch, the light was gone, just so quickly. In its place was, in the same exact place where the star-like object was a fireball, probably about the size of a dime, held at arm's length. That began to move. And that, in about 90 seconds, and I kept following it, walking toward our neighbor's property until as it was traveling at the same altitude, unvarying direction or speed, after a minute and a half, it disappeared over the horizon. And when I walked back to talk to the rest of, the kickball players, and so we can, share notes and compare, what each of us had seen, the people in the group had seen things completely different than what I had seen. And I was the first to see it and the last to watch it, as I say, disappear over the horizon. One of the witnesses claimed to see, and I described carefully what I had seen. I just described it to you. One of the witnesses had seen 3 multicolored lights, 3 lights of a different color in the same vicinity of the objects I described to you. I never saw anything like that. And there was another feature that another witness described. This is a different witness. And I thought to myself, I didn't see that either. This is impossible. How did this happen? So this is something I couldn't understand then, and I couldn't understand now, until I put another piece of the puzzle together with the puzzle to kind of give me an answer. Because one of the other witnesses, a third witnesses, had said to me, Bruce, where did you go? And I said, I was walking next door to see the where the object was going. She said, no, I saw you there, but you had disappeared. So I gather from this, I infer from all of this, all of these observations and reports from the different witnesses of this event, that this was another abduction event. Within the, especially when viewed within the context of all my other experiences, many of which can really check every single box in the core alien abduction syndrome that's been reported in the literature. So that's why I think that was also another abduction experience.
And that's common for multiple witnesses to be looking at UAPs and see different things. I just heard George Knapp
Right.
talking about that recently. Someone wants to know, what color was the star in your view?
It was bright white light. And I'll tell you, in the 60s, Devin, I saw many reports where the UAPs had these 2 configurations. First, there was a bright light that might have been spherical. It might have looked like a star in the distance, but actually much closer than a real star. And then it would transform into this fireball type of configuration. And again, that was something that I saw that other people have reported, mainly in the 60s, from what I've learned.
What do you make of that? Because someone else says they saw the same thing, of these objects that appear to be able to change shape, which is something that sounds crazy, but so many credible people have actually reported this.
Yes, it sounds crazy until you realize that our own government, our own military, has actually developed cloaking technology. Not only can, from what I've read, and using what's called transformation optics, the area of physics that would explain how this happens, can create, as you know from reading about stealth technology, can create an aircraft that is invisible on radar, but it also can be invisible to the human eye. So again, if we have we're able to construct aircraft. At least our government, our military can construct aircraft with these very strange metamaterials, unusual physical properties that can bend light or bend, microwaves, so to as to cloak, the spacecraft. We don't know what we're looking at with these UAPs. Are we looking at a cloaking technology? Are we actually seeing some type of um, transformation in the real transformation in the shape of the object? We don't really know what we're looking at, but I think I won't say it's very commonly reported, but it's reported enough to to uh, to make me find those reports quite credible.
Someone is asking if you had sleep paralysis around this time.
Yes, yes, I did, and to tell you the truth, I know this is a common characteristic of that abductees report, and I did have sleep paralysis, but like I would attribute to many abductees. Many of us have sleep paralysis with no medical cause. We wake up, we may see alien beings, we may see beings that look like the Greys. But when you drill down and look at the medical history of these individuals, they have known nothing in their medical or psychological, psychiatric history, such as sleep disturbance, post-traumatic stress, other type of medical issue that would account for these this pattern of recurrent sleep paralysis. And that's why I attribute the correlation between the phenomenon of alien abduction and sleep paralysis more to something the aliens are causing to happen, physiological changes in the human being that the aliens are causing to facilitate the abduction and the examination of the abductee. But I've had that experience a number of times, and like a lot of abductees have reported.
We'll have to Google what this person is saying. Ultrasound mice torpor, if I'm reading that correctly. Somebody else says they had a close encounter where white light dimmed out and orange light hovering in
Wow,
place.
wow.
And then another person was asking if they asked you to look towards the light. Did they tell you to look up at the light at all during this experience? Telepathically?
No, no, but it's amazing. I've heard that before. I can't say that I was either made to understand that I should look in a certain direction or was told telepathically to do that. But I know other abductees have reported that. But everyone in this group of contactees or abductees somehow is either, I won't say necessarily by curiosity all the time, but they're just compelled to look up um, where the object is and almost be unable to look away from it. Now, I did have another experience where I walked outside. I was compelled to get up in the middle of the night, walk outside, and then suddenly just turned my head to the left, and there was the object. I don't know why I turned my head. It was almost as if I was instructed to do so, but only when I did that did I see there was a UFO there. But in terms of telepathic communication, instructing me to look up at the objects you see in the sky now, that has not happened to me precisely like that.
Now, when you say that the craft at the one time when you were 10 looked like the Star of David, this is kind of a weird question, but do you think that some of these religions could actually be based on UFO
No, no,
either?
no, no. No, I misled you. When I say the Star of Bethlehem, I don't mean the Star of David with the 6 points, but it had several very pronounced, but again in an asymmetric configuration where some points were longer than others, and I couldn't tell you that there were more than three or four of these points in the star, but they were in terms of they weren't all at the same. You couldn't say that they were all you know equidistant from one another and were all had the same length. It was more asymmetric than that. But I didn't then, and I don't now think that the appearance had any religious significance, except that in the Bible, this is what what Joseph and Mary have reportedly seen on on the day that Christ was born. But it wasn't it wasn't the classic six-sided um, Star of David configuration.
Interesting. So you mentioned that it looked like the being on the Whitley Strieber book, which was kind of your a gray type alien being. Was it
Uh-huh.
always the same type of being? Because in Travis Walton's story, for example, he saw many beings.
Yes, yes, he did. But I've only seen the Greys. I mean, they've always been had the same external anatomical appearance, the same height, the same frame, all the same small frame, um, with this disproportionately large hairless heads. I again, I did. There was one time I had an encounter where I saw one, and actually, because the being was so close to a a table lamp where I could measure the height of it, I could actually measure the height of the being as actually being between 3.5 to 4 foot tall. Because after I had this experience, I was able to measure the height of the table lamp. This being had the same external anatomical appearance, but was more gray in color for some reason. But prior to that, all the other beings I had seen looked like the grays. But and this is very commonly reported in the literature that many abductees report they have a white color or a gray color. And in fact, there is another group of abductees that actually have reported seeing some type of a biomechanical suit inside the UFO when they're taken on board, and others claim to feel that for the classic gray alien, they're not looking at the skin. That is in fact some type of form fitting bodysuit that may be some type of a biomechanical suit that may have some protective or other function. So that what we're seeing when we see the grays is that they're not their actual skin color, but maybe some type of a suit that's some type of clothing that's covering the body.
Did you feel paralyzed at all when you were on these operating tables, or were you able to move?
When I woke up on the table, I I could move. But the strange thing was, as soon as I could look at the alien beings, wonder what they were, but as soon as I verbalized, that question as I described it to you, and I felt that pressure on my chest, I knew I could physically move, but for some reason I had lost all urge, all will to move my body to resist the force that was pushing me back down on the table. And I described this in the book how I think that one of the ways that the alien beings who abduct human beings can control them is through neurophysiological mechanisms where they're able either to paralyze or to have some effect uh, on willpower by some unknown mechanism in order to control the subject better for the purpose of the experiment.
Very interesting. Where do you think these things are coming from?
Whenever I get asked that question, I have to put on my biologist hat and and look at the data. And the best set of data I have in terms of my own particular research is from Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, where he describes in detail what the allegedly what the pathologist doctors at Walter Reed Hospital in Washington found when they did the postmortem examination of the aliens that crashed at Roswell. And there's a lot of detail about their external anatomical features that remarkably mirrors everything the abductees have reported. And there's a lot of information about their internal anatomy as well. My takeaway from this is that these beings are corporeal. They're material. They're biological. They're sentient, but they're here interacting with us for the purposes of conducting some types of scientific experiments. I don't know where they originate from. They could be from a distant galaxy. Certainly, if you believe Bob Lazar's story, that they'd have to come from a great distance if the propulsion system of the UFOs or UAPs that carry these beings is based on gravitational energy, which would mean we're talking about some type of warp drive or gravity drive, so that they have to construct these vehicles to travel a very long distance, but from some point in our contiguous universe. I can't rule out that they come from another dimension. For example, if you believe in the many worlds interpretation of our universe, that there are different, like slices in an onion, there are different dimensions that we can't see in our own universe, that these beings are interdimensional, so that they're able, and our physics doesn't understand even if these dimensions actually exist in physical reality, how we can see into them, or whether or not we can develop a technology to be able to travel into another dimension and back and forth. But these beings may be advanced enough technologically to do that. So I kind of favor that they're living in a distant galaxy in the same contiguous universe that we're living in. But I can't rule out the fact, the theory that, or the possibility that they're from another dimension.
What about the theory that they could be from underwater and there could be some type of bases underwater? Or do you think that they're going into water for other reasons, or it could be a different type of being than the one that you had contact with?
I think you're suggesting that they've been here a really long time. So it's maybe not appropriate to call them aliens if they've been here for thousands or millions of years. And I'm sympathetic to that theory, uh, especially when I again consider the day after Roswell, and which has caused me to speculate scientifically that the Greys are actually, well, they're drones, they're worker drones that are under the direction of some master, more superior alien beings, but but that the Greys were possibly genetically engineered from one of our early, meaning human beings, early hominin ancestors, maybe 1 to 2 million years ago. And what's interesting is that one of our hominin ancestors was 3.5 to 4 feet tall. I'm talking about Homo habilis, which I think lived about 1 million to 2 million years ago. So it's possible that, we've had some advanced alien civilization that's been here on planet Earth doing experiments on a variety of species, including our own, and perhaps conducting genetic engineering experiments on us from the very beginning, our very beginnings. And that's something I speculate on in my book Dominion Lost.
And you mentioned that one of the people that you researched into was David Jacobs, who
Mm-hmm.
he put out a book which I haven't read yet, but I've listened to many interviews of him, and he's really into the genetic engineering side of it, and he believes that there are hybrids, and I believe he
Yes,
thinks they're trying to populate Earth. What do you think about that? Because they don't seem to have taken any sexual samples to you. It might just be more kind of like they've tagged you and are going to check in on you every so often.
I didn't say that. You'll have to read the book. I
Okay.
mean,
Okay.
okay, so Yeah, I mean, I can't rule that out because I did have an encounter where I suspect that might have happened, and but you know, Jacobs, Dr. John Mack, Bud Hopkins, they've all interviewed and hypnotically regressed um, abductees that have reported these. Well, they call them hybrid beings, but at different stages of development. Where early on, we'll call it stage one, back in the 60s or 70s, they the abductees saw on board the UFOs children that looked very much like the Greys, but more human looking. And as the program, based on the interviews with thousands of abduction witnesses, as the program developed, it seemed as if the these hybrid children were looking more and more human. And Jacob's theory is that, and he calls them, and the other investigators call them hybrids. I call them alien human, transgenic alien human beings. They're human beings that have alien DNA or novel genetic sequences that have been introduced by some alien scientist for some purpose. But Jacob's theory is that the program is advanced to the stage, he calls it stage 3 or 4, where the hybrids are here on Earth. They look exactly like you and I. They're under the control of the species that created these transgenic beings, but we don't know what their agenda is, what their purpose is for being on Earth. And based on all the abduction reports that I've read, I think there's quite a bit of evidence that would support this theory. None of it's conclusive, but I found Jacob's theories, very plausible.
If they were to, I don't know if you would say take us over or have a malevolent intent, would one way of doing it be to just slowly populate Earth with hybrids or whatever you
Well,
called them?
that yeah, I didn't get to one aspect of the program, and Jacobs has alluded to this, and I've discussed it in my book as well, and that is, you have these this hybrid population with these, let's speculate and call them alien DNA or alien genes, and one of the purposes of putting them on Earth, one of the purposes is for them to interbreed with other humans or with other abductees. And what the effect that will have is to increase the frequency of those alien genetic sequences in the human population. Now, I don't know what particular traits those novel genetic sequences would confer. Would they allow the the master alien species that's in charge of this program to control us more effectively, or would that endow us with um, traits and abilities, cognitive abilities, extrasensory abilities that very few of us have now? I don't know, but I think that would be the one effect of having them, um, on Earth, according to Jacobs, and according to my own theory, is that that would allow the the beings to interbreed with other human beings and distribute these genes within the population.
I heard one of David Jacobs' abduction experiences was it was like they transported him to another area, like a teleportation type of thing, where he was transported with a group of other individuals that also seemed to have been teleported there because they didn't really know how they got there. But the beings seemed to be happy that they had pulled off this quote unquote test, and then they sent them back. But did you ever have anything like that where you encountered other human beings on any of these abduction cases?
No, many abductees have, but I've never seen other human beings. You know, I do want to mention that when I was on board what I thought was a UFO on an examination table, I did get the impression that I was in a very large facility. and that there were other rooms next to my room that I couldn't see, that the alien beings were walking back and forth toward. But I did not see any other human beings in my room or anywhere in that facility while I was there.
And I believe with him too, they were conducting a lot of tests on him, like psychological tests and reaction tests, and he would be rewarded or punished based on how
Yes.
cooperative he was to these tests. That seems a lot different than yours. So, do you think that could be a case of different beings, or just they wanted him for a different purpose?
Well, I reported on that exactly what you talked about in my book, because I tried to analyze what was happening. It didn't happen to me. It didn't happen to Jacobs, but it happened to a number of witnesses that he interviewed, abduction witnesses that he interviewed, and I am speculating that um, because there's the issue of implants that he studied. Whitley Strieber has mentioned it. Dr. Mack, Bud Hopkins all talked about implants. And my theory is that these psychological tests are done for the purpose of understanding human brain function, and perhaps have one purpose in mind, to be able to train a implanted brain computer interface that was implanted either in the nasal cavity, in the ear, or perhaps inside the brain of the abductee, to learn how the brains function, to catalog human cognitive function, and perhaps learn how to control human neural function, by training this implant, which I theorize is a brain computer interface, and these psychological tests again are 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 done for the purpose of training this AI implanted device.
And another thing David Jacobs mentioned, because I've researched him extensively,
Mm-hmm.
is they seem to have a fascination with war and hats, that humans wear hats. For some reason, they found that very funny, but they were very interested in war and his reaction to images of war. Did you get any experiences like that, or again, that's just a
Well,
different type of thing?
the way I saw those particular accounts, I, was that I viewed them in the context of a number of accounts where images are, while the abductees on board the UFO, they're paralyzed. They may remember an implant inserted into their nasal cavity, and they undergo this psychological testing. Images are implanted into their mind of something bad happening to one of their close friends or relatives. They're shown images of war, images that are intended to provoke an emotional reaction. And my theory is that again, this this particular experiment is done for the purpose of understanding human emotion, understanding the neural mechanisms, the sites in the brain that mediate the human emotional response. As part of a scientific experiment, or and part of the knowledge that's gained may also be to understand how to control human beings by controlling human emotion. And but again, I that's how I see the uh, uh, the accounts of human beings being shown images of war and people dying in catastrophes and the end of time scenario. Um, that I think it may be done for the purpose of analyzing human brain function. Now there are other cases where the abductee is told directly, again telepathically, that human beings are not good stewards of the planet, that we're killing our planet. And when that type of direct communication occurs, that may not be, that might be related to some other purpose that the aliens have to kind of let us know they're here too, and we need to do a better job taking care of the planet, because they have an interest in it. They have a stake in the earth as we do. So there may be different agendas at play here.
Yeah, I wonder why they would take such an indirect way of going about warning us supposedly about the
Right.
planet issues. If they did they do that to you too? I just find it
No.
funny that like they'll tell like 12-year-old kids in Zimbabwe, but they won't like they if they're this intelligent, they would know better ways to actually get a
I,
change in pollution to me.
I really agree with that, Devin. I just think it's part of their study. They're just trying to study our response for whatever reason, not to educate us. I think if anything, if um, they want to change human behavior and the behavior of human society, I think they can accomplish that by by ways that maybe it's going to take us many decades to understand.
I can definitely see why they would be concerned about nuclear war and those type of missiles being around, though. And I don't necessarily think it's just for our protection if they have assets here or if they have programs they're running here. Or there's also talk that the electromagnetic pulses from these nuclear missiles can actually affect how their aircraft fly, supposedly.
Well, I first thing I wanted to say, if they're trying to change our behavior, they should abduct some of our leaders in the government or some of the people in the military. But I'm not advocating that. I'm just wondering why they would try to modify human society by abducting the average person off the street. But I'm not that persuaded by the idea that the UFOs, the crashes of all the UFOs that we've heard about over the past few decades, are attributable to, you know, um, detonation of nuclear bombs, like the Starfish Prime test in the '60s, where they detonated a nuclear bomb over Hawaii, and there was clearly a powerful EMP produced over the course of 10 or 20 microseconds that released gamma radiation that, by interacting with the Earth's geomagnetic field, produced its own EMP, and that knocked out a few streetlights in Honolulu, 800 miles away. But I don't think that um, that would have the same effect on a UFO. Certainly, if you think of a UFO with the five observables that the Lua Elizondo talked about, very, very advanced technologically in terms of flight characteristics, and but even not getting to those advanced um, technologies. First of all, I would imagine that a UFO would be able to uh, through similar technology to what we have, the forward-looking infrared. They would be able to see the thermal signature of the ICBM when it launched, follow its trajectory to the point at which 250 miles above the surface of the Earth, the nuclear warhead was detonated, and they would certainly be able to pick that up, and also when you look at one of the five observables, the UFOs, many UFOs have demonstrated this sudden or instantaneous acceleration. So clearly, if they could pick up the ICBM in flight, um, they'd be able to be thousands of miles away, a safe distance from the UFO, from the EMP effects of the nuclear detonation, instantly. Not only that, our military has had the capability. We call them the boys with their toys. They have Geiger counters or radiation detect. They've had radiation detection instruments that can detect a radiation signature from a dirty bomb or nuclear warhead from a kilometer or more away. They had that 50 years ago. And alien technology would be able to have radiation detection instruments that are hundreds or thousands of times more sensitive. But there's another possibility, and that is that even if um, even if we have to account for the fact that there are numerous EMP effects of of UFOs, they cause house lights, street lights, and even car transmissions to be affected, suggesting that they have an EMP or excuse me, electromagnetic propulsion system. Uh, that suggests that they would be susceptible to the effect of a nuclear EMP. But what if Bob Lazar is right? What if the propulsion system, as he described it in Dreamland, is not based on electromagnetic energy, but based instead on gravitational wave energy? That propulsion system would not be affected by a nuclear EMP. And in addition, the even even if the electronics of the UFO might be subject to the effects of the the nuclear EMP, we can we can easily shield our electronic components with what's called a Faraday cage, which is a material that you can enclose the device you want to protect with a material that is what we call diamagnetic. It can actually oppose the electromagnetic field, repel it, repulse it, because it has it create its own electromagnetic field that can prevent the EMP from even entering into the device that the Faraday cage would protect. I would think the aliens would have devices for hardening their electronics that are much more sophisticated than that. So that's why I think that the cause of the crashes of UFOs has to do with something other than an EMP from a nuclear detonation.
Do you think that the US government, and I'm sure some other governments must, but we'll put the US government up there since that's where we both are right now, has ways of possibly countering UAPs that we just don't know about at this point?
I think I lost you there for a second.
Oh, can you hear me
Devin, are you
now?
there?
Yes.
Yes,
Can
you're
you hear me
talking
now?
about that the government has ways of. Yeah,
Yeah.
I heard you talking about the government.
Oh, I was wondering if you think the government has ways of
Go ahead.
countering UAP technology. There might be some type of delay.
Oh, I'm very skeptical. I know Philip Corso. Okay, yeah, there is a delay.
Okay, go. You can
Oh
try
yeah,
going
yes.
now.
So, I'm going to try to answer your question. I'm skeptical of that. I know Philip Corso mentioned that we're able to do this. We had some, oh gosh, back in he claims the 50s and 60s, that the U.S. military had directed energy weapons that could bring down UFOs. I'm highly skeptical of that. Now today, don't forget that the Star Wars program that Reagan championed was abandoned after he left office. So I don't know how much progress we made in that area since the Reagan years, to tell you the truth.
Well, as far as Whitley Strieber, you said you've researched him, and as we get towards the end of this here, I've researched Whitley Strieber a lot too. He seems to have had an awful lot happen to him, and he is an author, and he was a fiction author before
Right.
he started this abduction stuff. He does know a lot about this phenomenon and a
Yes.
lot of legitimate stuff about it, but some of his stories are very far out there, and it's some of it is just bizarre, like a little dwarf that was smoking cigarettes in his house in one of his books. I don't know if you've heard that one. I'm just wondering what
No,
percentage do you think,
I
what
just
percentage
it's so
chance.
no. What I'm laughing at. It's so funny. I just had a conversation with another podcast person, who's also an experiencer, that mentioned the same anecdote that you just mentioned about there's a good bit of his accounts that are believable, and other friends of his have had similar experiences to his while they stayed at his cabin in upstate New York in I think in the 80s or 90s. But then he has these anecdotes where he describes meeting the strangest people, and they look human, but they're standing outside his house smoking cigarettes, 100, 200 cigarettes, and for some reason that caused him to believe that an alien hybrid, human hybrid, had invaded his property. So these type of accounts do raise alarm bells, but a lot of what he reports in communion, in transformation, and other books that were published in the era of the 80s and 90s um, do have some discussion that includes some scientific analysis of implants that have been given to him from a number of abductees that he sent out for scientific analysis. So he does make you know, some attempts to do some type of methodical, um, objective analysis of what happened to him. He's undergone CT scans and neurological examination, including EEGs, to try to distinguish, what his experiences would be from, medical conditions such as epilepsy and so forth. So I'll give him some credit, but a lot of what he's talking about, uh, many people find hard to believe. It's true.
Yeah, and again, I would say there's definitely a percentage of what he's saying that seems believable, but some of this stuff kind of takes you out of it. Same with Stephen Greer. What's your opinion on Stephen Greer? With him, a lot of it, some parts are believable, but then there's other stuff that he says that it kind of takes me out of like believing him wholeheartedly.
He believes it. I mean, to start a company, that is going to pioneer the development of zero point energy with his money, and he's trying to get some investors to go along with him. He must believe it, but he presents scientific evidence in a very superficial way, where he'll give anecdotal accounts of what this scientist said. When this scientist that claimed to patent, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, and prompting him to claim that the U.S. government, and particularly the military, has had zero point energy that could solve all the energy needs of the planet, that they've been hiding for more than half a century. And they have propulsion systems, gravitic or electromagnetic propulsion systems, that account for a lot of the UAPs that we've been seeing for 50 years, which I find very difficult to believe. I I'm very confident that what was observed, the thousands of reports in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, were not ours. They were all demonstrative of technologies that no one, no government on Earth had a clue about, at that time. Now, since then, if you believe Bob Lazar, I, I'm open to the possibility that some progress has been made in reverse engineering the propulsion system of the alien UFO. I don't know how much progress, but has been made. But if you believe Lazar, that we've had, or at least the U.S. military has been into possession of at least a a gravity drive propulsion system. Whether or not they could then take that and construct a UFO from de novo, you know, um, that would mimic all of the characteristics of the alien UFO. That I would find hard to believe even today, but I do believe that it's possible that we've made some progress in reverse engineering these craft. I'm just not sure how much.
He seems to think that all of the cattle mutilations are due to black projects. I believe even George Knapp says some of them are due to that, even though apparently it's the biggest unsolved mystery of all time as far as unsolved crimes. But do you think they are all due to black government projects for whatever reason, why they're doing that? Or is that due to some type of hybrid program
Well,
as well?
the one fact that I think of as a salient fact is what Linda Moulton Howe has said. And I think it's a great point, that And since the time that the first cattle mutilation was reported, there have been, I don't know how many, 60, 70,000, tens of thousands of these accounts where farmers have lost so much cattle, and they report the same physical effects, and not a single entity, individual, company has been prosecuted for that crime. So I find it. I mean, while I find it credible that maybe some of the mutilations are due to, military laboratory studies, secret covert studies. You know, I think that's we're looking at just the tip of the iceberg. I think that the great bulk of them are attributable to more advanced civilization than our own. That's my gut feeling.
Would you guess that the beings that you dealt with eat actual living objects, such as maybe cows, and maybe that's why they're breeding them or whatever they're doing with these parts or cloning them?
Yeah, I haven't made in my book Dominion Lost. I have not made any connection between the human abduction experience and the cattle mutilations, but you know they may be learning things about um, genetics and how it relates to the function of individual genes that aids them in their studies on human beings, which is very similar to what human scientists do. We learn a lot about, since we're all mammals. That's why we have certain models, rodent models of certain diseases, and that's why we study the biology of a variety of species to learn how to understand and treat human disease. So that, again, the cattle mutilation, if there is a program, a cattle mutilation experimental program, and maybe somehow related um, to the human abduction program, because they're using the experiments on cattle to learn things that they need to learn to be able to carry out the experimentation on humans as well.
And when was the last time you were actually abducted?
I'm not sure. You know, I, I I've had experiences where I felt, again, this feeling of sleep paralysis, and I feel being touched. I feel some type of a hand on my head, and again, having the recollection of in my early years of having a nasal implant. I wonder if I'm still being experimented on, particularly as it relates to the uh, the implants that I speculate are brain computer interface devices. But I don't have any as much concrete memory as I did about what happened to me when I was a child.
Now that you've done all this research, if you could have a conscious abduction experience, is there anything you would do different?
Gosh, you bring up Whitley Strieber, and he had a good idea of trying to steal something from the UFO to bring it back to be analyzed by our science. Put something in my pocket. Uh, you know, I don't think they would let me take a picture with my cell phone. But if I had some type of if I knew it was going to happen, and I had some type of device that would record audio or video, a hidden camera, yeah, I mean, I would certainly like to try that, because it's something that's never been happened. It's never happened. No objective evidence has been carried back by an abductee from after they've been on board a UFO. Um, Even I think Betty Hill tried to ask her captor if they would give her some evidence, a book or something, and then I think they said no.
Yeah, she had quite a conversation with hers, and there's an interview with her that goes into a lot of detail. It seemed like Barney had a very negative experience, and
Right.
Betty seemed to have a very jolly experience almost. Um, Very good conversation. But Last question here. Why do you think they chose you, and why multiple times?
Well, as I report in the book, there's a chapter that deals with the physical effects of the implantation procedure, and I really and you who studied the work of David Jacobs will, I think this will resonate with you. You know, I feel that my grandfather was involved in the program. I think that as a result of it, he died. That he had an implant that caused an infection in the sinuses that spread to the meninges of his brain that took his life when he was only 42 years old. And Jacobs has talked about a large number of witnesses, as long, in addition, Bud Hopkins did as well, where the abductions occurred in families, in not just one or two generations, but multiple generations of the same family. And why individual witnesses are abducted frequently, I think because there may be some type of manipulation, whether it's genetic manipulation or other type of behavioral manipulation that occurs during the experiments on human beings that they're trying to observe over the course of months and years after uh, the intervention is made, so that each individual abductee is part of a long-term experiment that we human scientists do with our animal research. So that's my guess.
Very good. Well, I appreciate your insights. And if any fans want to pick up your book, the link is in the description and it's up on the screen now. Do you want to show us your book and give us a little, what can we expect in the book that we haven't talked about? I know a lot more detail.
Well, the theory that I provide a lot of evidence for, that the Great Northeast Blackout that caused 38 million people to lose power in 1965, the greatest blackout in U.S. history at the time, was caused by a UFO. Exactly how human science could genetically engineer the grays, as I believe they've been genetically engineered from our early hominin ancestors of human beings, and exactly how the implants that, as I mentioned, that I believe are brain-computer interfaces, how they work in the brain, the type of energy they use, the type of materials they're constructed of. There's a lot of scientific analysis in this book that's never been done uh, by any ufologist. It's never been published in this particular field. But be honest with you, a lot of people are not as interested in the scientific analysis and want to hear only about my personal UFO close encounter and abduction experiences. And they're in that case, if they're only interested in what happened to me, they can buy a much shorter, abridged version of my book, Dominion Lost. That's about 200 pages. If they're interested in the scientific analysis after reading this book, they can pick up either the audio book or the ebook or printed version of the book that has the more sciencey parts, if they're so inclined. But I do have these two versions that I hope will accommodate the varying taste of the readers.
Now, just about that book, the cover, the being on the cover, was that done based on your description of the being?
That's exactly what I saw, Devin. And I wanted to point out that 16 years later, 16 years after I had this particular experience, those beings are exactly what the beings at the end of Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind look like. The same height, the same appearance. And I think I heard that he had used 6-year-old girls with prosthetics and makeup to look like the aliens that appeared in Close Encounters. That's exactly what I saw 16 years earlier, when I was abducted from my bedroom in 1961.
And I hear Spielberg is making another UAP
Yes,
movie. And I really hope that the theory that this might actually be a disclosure movie rather than a fiction movie, or a fiction movie that might lead to helping increase disclosure. I hope that's true.
it certainly looked like from Close Encounters he had, well, certainly J. Allen Hynek, right? Wasn't he
Yeah.
the head of Blue Book, Project Blue Book? was a consultant. He probably had other military consultants. He seemed to have, in 77, when the movie was released, a lot of inside information at the time. And I'm sure he's gathered a lot more inside information since then. So I hope you're right. That would be great if some of the disclosure, which we think was supposed to happen through the movies decades ago, is going to happen in the next couple of years. But I'd like to hear it, from the horse's mouth, from our government and our military, rather than having it appear in a fictional portrayal in the movies, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Well, I'm very confident Donald Trump is probably going to at least say non-human intelligence exists soon, because he's really gone out on a limb and seems to indicate that he's going to do something like that. And a lot of his representatives are saying the same
I
thing.
think
So they're
I think I heard him say, Devin, that if very soon after he's inaugurated, he's going to try to get to the bottom of the drone sightings in New Jersey and reveal to the public what they're all about. At least he said that. I'm pretty sure I
Yeah,
heard him say that.
he definitely said that. So that's something to look forward to. I don't think we're going to have to wait for that Spielberg movie, but if the government doesn't tell us by then, if he really wanted to put it out in a way that would convince people, I think he could do it. But I appreciate your time again,
Thank you. It was
and
it was
I'll
great
let you.
talking to you. I enjoyed it.
Me too, and it's great knowledge from scientific mind. I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans.
I well, I wrote the book. I won't. I will say mainly to describe my experiences and try to contribute to disclosure. But I also wrote it to encourage other scientists, not who may have had these experiences, to come forward. I know Dr. Gary Nolan has already, but I wish others would as well. Some have contacted me that have had high level government positions as scientists that have told me they've had these experiences. But I have to honor their anonymity, respect their anonymity. But I hope that not only will the book encourage other scientists to come forward with what's happened to them, but also um, to more seriously consider this subject as being worthy of scientific investigation. We need more and more um, people from the scientific community to turn their eyes toward the direction of this particular phenomenon and study it seriously. And it also requires funding, of course, but we have to change the minds of people in the scientific community, because we need their help to try and understand what's going on and what ramifications it has for the human race.